Yeah, and you, of course, you edit as well, so kind of like you can like chop and change to kind of create a little, well, yeah, minimal. You want minimal editing. Yeah.
I do minimal editing because I don't like the amount of
Work.
No. It's that I don't like the amount of like curated lives that we like seem to lead, and so like people are only sharing what they want to share or that kind of stuff. And I don't see myself in the role of like the arbiter of good taste. And I also don't edit the conversation very much oftentimes because one little aspect that might seem insignificant to me ends up coming back again in the conversation later, or something that I don't find particularly interesting might connect with a listener incredibly well in some way that like I could never have foreseen.
Yeah.
So I generally leave pretty much everything in.
I mean, do you want to? I mean, before we actually like,
we're already recording.
Okay, but I was going to say, I mean, okay, we're recording, but I mean, do you want to have a look at this, the work or some of the pieces? And so
you don't think I looked at the work?
No, but like I didn't spend enough time looking at the work.
I'm going to hear a lot about you and your life and your work. I'm quite sure in the next hour, so I'm not too concerned about having a tour pre-recording.
Yeah, I can kind of see myself across the room anyway, so it's like
Okay, there's a lovely portrait with the, I believe if I saw it, mustachioed.
Yeah. I mean, particularly, I mean, I guess that's quite a good place to start in terms of like me being in Norway and in the work I've made.
That's fine. The first thing I actually like to ask people is, could you please pronounce your name correctly for me?
Okay, even I can't pronounce my name correctly, but it's Saeed Sattar Hasan. That's what I go by. Yeah.
Why is that not correct?
Well, my so in a way, actually, like, so my dad's Pakistani, my mum's English. My dad moved to the UK in the 70s. On his own, didn't expect to stay, met my mum, but essentially, obviously, like, my mum doesn't speak like Urdu or Punjabi, so she found it difficult to say sort of the name my father gave me, so generally kind of is pronounced Saeed, so my mum says Saeed, it's a bit easier.
Would it be Syed?
Saeed, but it'd be Sayyid.
Sayyid,
which doesn't roll off the tongue, particularly when you're kind of growing up in the 80s in the UK, so going to Catholic school. So
I had been calling you Syed, yes.
Yeah. So,
and I even live in the Middle East, so
yeah. So, but yeah, Saeed. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So, So let's give a little background on sort of who you are. So right now, and I apologize in case the acoustics is horrible in this recording in advance for the listeners, but we are in this quite magnificent studio in the tower over City Hall in Oslo, all of which just sounds like it's an absurd sentence to say artist studio location.
Yeah, totally absurd. Kind of, and when you kind of start to add it up, like we're in the building where the Nobel Peace Prize is held annually.
That's why it looked familiar.
It's held here. It's quite confusing because I guess if you're a tourist in Oslo, across the way, like 2 minutes away, you have the Nobel Peace Center, but that's kind of an exhibition center. But the ceremony itself, like, it's the only one of the Nobel Prizes to be awarded in Oslo, but kind of it was specially designated. Okay, the Nobel Peace Prize must be issued in Oslo, and it's been taking place here I don't know how many years. So, which again is another crazy thing. It's like, wow, like we're 13 floors above where the Nobel Peace Prize is held, and it's a really magnificent building. It's they've had artist studios in Oslo City Hall for ever since since it's been built. So even before it was opened, there was it was used as a studio space. So it's kind of got this legacy of artist studios. So it's kind of quite it is a prestigious space, but also it's kind of still fairly, I won't say unknown, but it's surprising how few people know about it as well. So it's
I did not know about it until I was introduced to it by our partner organization, Kunstsentrene i Norge. They informed me about this location. I hadn't heard about it.
Yeah, in a way, I can't give like this definitive history of Oslo City Hall, but I'm cool with that. It's I guess it also reflects how kind of suddenly I ended up here. Yeah, I mean, essentially you have 3 studios, and you have one studio for an established Norwegian artist who currently is Tora Magna Gundersen. Then you have a studio for, the definition's a little bit uncertain actually. You could call it a young artist, but in art terms, I mean, a young artist could be somebody, like who's been practicing for like 10 years or under 50,
I like emerging artists.
Emerging, but I mean, in a way, emerging's been used too, but also emerging is like, we can perhaps return to the idea of emerging, because, emerging can be like this perpetual state of emergence, So it's like, fuck, man, it's like, I've been an artist for like 10 years and I'm still being referred to as an emerging artist. And so either Madsen Furling has the, let's just say for argument's sake, Atelier B, because it's A, B, and C. And I'd say, I describe her kind of not so much as, I think it's safe to say she's emerged, Yeah, and so I have the studio for the Utlandskunstner, so, which is kind of international or foreign artist. It's a space which kind of is designated to usually the non-white artist in kind of like, if I think back to kind of the previous studio holders.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, you said non-white.
Okay,
correct?
This is me being like it might sound slightly controversial, but kind of it is what it is at the same time. I think the past few recipients have been like, it in a way it's okay, I'm digging myself a hole here, but it's like, it's a good thing at the same time. It's somebody who's not necessarily from Norway, and it's, I guess, kind of it ticks kind of like what art does, is like the diversity boxes, which is kind of like at the same time kind of, I think, really necessary. So I can't
Agreed, but I think you were using slightly broad strokes with saying non-white, because I mean that you're implying that everybody not in Norway is not white.
No, of course, that's no, but that's the thing. So yeah.
We'll take it back a step though. So how did you even get this opportunity? Because like A, I'd never even heard the studios existed. B, like how do you even apply for something like this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so essentially like it's a friend of mine. So I moved to Norway in July 4th, maybe a relevant date for you.
Well, it's a relevant American day.
You might be aware of that day. So we did July 4th, 2018. So I moved here. So kind of, and then the following year, I ended up here. But how I ended up here was a friend of mine, a Norwegian artist. I said, "Oh, why don't you apply for a studio?" And in a way, kind of. I think maybe you've been traveling in Norway for a bit now, so you understand kind of like there's very kind of you have a calendar of opportunities in Norway, through the funding systems or kind of like applying for studios, and so kind of like, I guess, taking it back a step about these studios before launching into my controversial opinions on who ends up in the Utlandskunstner studio. It's these get awarded every 2 years. So basically, there was a kind of, the open call, which is now just passed again because we're leaving. It was, why don't you try applying for it? And I mean, I was completely, in a sense, ignorant of what goes on here, and I applied. And
it might have been to your advantage.
Maybe, yeah, but it's kind of there's a committee, and they kind of like select the applications. I think they received quite a lot of applications, and I guess thank you to the people who ended up, sort of like awarding me the studio. But yeah. Well,
give me let's sort of like flesh out this whole thing. So this is a free studio, a paid, how is the sort of logistics of the studio opportunity?
Yeah. So I mean, essentially, you're given 2 years and it's completely free.
That's ridiculous.
It's a really great opportunity because I mean it's very rare to kind of like be given such space in such a prestigious building and completely free. So as I say, I mean, I was living in Norway for like 1 year before I received this. So kind of I have a completely warped sense of like what life in Norway is.
Yeah, to you, everybody gets free studios.
Yeah,
every
it's like
year.
free studios. It's kind of just grand buildings, high ceilings. But actually, I mean, I am now. We're actually, so we've begun in the summer of 2019, and we're about to now this summer leave the studios. So we're coming to the kind of the end of our stay here. So so we're going to kind of, get back down to reality a little bit, but we're aware of that.
And do you have a personal studio lined up for after you leave this amazingly prestigious location?
No, there's a couple of things, kind of like there's a couple of options, but I'm back kind of, I guess, kind of in the world of, okay, how much can I afford? Like, these kind of questions which for the past few years I haven't had to deal with. It's like, okay, I've got my entrance card, 24-hour access to this building. Kind of you come and go, and this is your life. But now I've got to, find probably kind of, a very small space, which isn't a problem, and pay for it, which could be a problem.
Well, I mean, I don't know the cost of living really. I mean, I know the cost of living in Norway is high in comparison to much of Europe and the world. But I mean, in the thought of how much you would have to pay for an artist studio, like, is it a lot in the life here?
That's an interesting question. I mean, my experience as an artist is in the UK and in Norway now, so I can kind of like compare those two situations. And I don't think Norway is any more expensive than, say, the UK.
Relative to the cost of living.
Relative to the cost of living, and also kind of the, I think it's quite proportional. But, I'm very interested in the idea of artist studios because, on the record, this is the very first artist studio I've ever had.
So did you not go to art school?
I'd never had a studio before here. So again, like my warped perception of what a studio should be.
Yes, you have been spoiled.
I've been spoiled, but however, there was a bit of hustling before I got here. I mean, okay, so in terms of my route to being an artist, I
love it. Yes, please do tell.
Yeah. So I mean, essentially, kind of I studied, always been into art, but like I channeled my energy into drawing when I was young. Ended up doing illustration at a BA level in Kingston University, which is kind of like in the London area, not central. So very early on, I kind of became an illustrator. Off my graduation show during my BA, which I kind of completely, how could you say, classically, during the course of the BA, thought this isn't for me. I kind of didn't enjoy illustration as much as I thought I would. But ended up kind of picking up an agent from basically my exhibition.
I'm sorry, wait, so slow down. You got an agent after your bachelor's degree?
Yeah, as a consequence of my exhibition. I mean, again, we're talking about like, very modest exhibition spaces, but illustration, it's a commercial business. So it was a commercial illustration agency picked me up.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think kind of, I won't dwell too much on the illustration kind of history, but, it's people are looking for new talent all the time. So it's I guess, a fast moving business. But, when I graduated, I mean, I'm not from London, so I kind of, essentially kind of taking a step back. I moved to London for my degree, moved into London afterwards, and it's, I was with an illustration agency doing kind of commercial work, like for international publications, kind of like, it's quite weird being like 20 years old and getting phone calls from art editors from like the Wall Street Journal and Time magazine, just sort of. So it was kind of like thrust into this very professional kind of world of like editorial illustration, but at the same time I was like a bellhop at a hotel in central London and doing other things as well.
As we all do.
Yeah. And but one thing, I didn't have time to like develop my practice in a way. Like, so it was always like, you'd get you'd get kind of a job, and it's the next client would be like, oh, we really love what you did last time, and could you do something? So you'd send kind of like, I don't know, like it's quite mad, it sounds really old-fashioned now, you'd fax over basically like sketches of the idea, and they're like, oh, but could it be more like the last job you did, and things like that. And so what I found myself, what was happening, I was having to kind of work a lot to basically get a regular salary, getting kind of these sporadic but but kind of, I guess, high profile commissions from like international publications. But like I was spending zero time like being creative. It was like I was playing catch up all the time. So I just I think after, I don't know how many years it was, a few years left, I remember speaking to my agent saying, it's in both of our interests not to kind of like continue with this relationship. So then I just kind of entered that kind of just a period of like being in your 20s and just, just focusing on like not knowing what you're doing.
I think all of us go through that at least once in their lives. I mean, if not multiple times. Quite honestly, I'm sort of at a point of that as well in my career, and I'm sort of like, there are not a huge amount of job opportunities for an art professor who's been traveling the world, kind of thing, but only speaks English. And so, yeah, I mean, everybody goes through these things off and on throughout their careers. And one of the hardest part is trying to figure out the way out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, like, I think it's a really great period with hindsight, maybe.
Yeah, when you're in it, horribly depressing and lonely and pathetic, and like you think you've done everything wrong, but then suddenly something positive happens.
Yeah, because I think in that space, it's hard to kind of really it's quite a nebulous space sometimes, and so you kind of, it's this cloud, and it's like. But the thing is, it's a space for exploration. It sounds very general, but I think it's the creative spaces actually which, when you kind of are on a set path, actually you sometimes miss as well. So I think it's that classic kind of paradox, is you can't enjoy it completely when you're in it, but when you're past that point, you kind of realize, wow, this is actually what it's about almost. So I guess kind of, and that's maybe, I think, almost a comment on artistic practice. It's how to keep that balance between this sort of this vigor, but also kind of this balance of professionalizing yourself as well, so you can kind of like continue, because also the space we're talking about is like this well which you can completely kind of get lost in, and you can also run it dry as well. Yeah. I mean, it's a hard balance. I mean, balance is a big word in my life. I often go back to it because, like, for instance, you were talking about having to be a bellhop and then do the job as a freelance designer and such. I mean, too many of us, I feel, in the creative industries have to have like a full-time job that pays the bills, and then we do our creative thing on the side. Yeah, I think that's horrible. Yeah. I mean, this is, again, this could be a very sprawling conversation because it already is. Yeah, so it totally is. Like, yeah. But okay, so the idea of like how to make money as an artist, it's the eternal conversation, right? Agreed. Yeah. So, and I mean, I remember when I was, I guess, made the transition to where I sort of became, from illustrator to, I guess, the general term visual artist. No one talked about like income, and I was always like fascinated with like, okay, we're all in this room, so we're all in this fancy building, this gallery, we're all kind of holding our glass of like free like wine or whatever. White wine, because red wine stains. Exactly. Yeah. I actually worked at a gallery that she didn't like white wine, so instead she served vodka. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it was ridiculous. Yeah. That sounds like a messy pie. It didn't stain. Yeah. Doesn't stain. It also gets stains out. It does if done right. Yeah. So I mean, it was people loved going to her openings. Yeah. I can imagine, but probably can't remember them. I was the sober one at the time, so I always remember all the absurdity. But yeah, it was ridiculous. In a good way. Great stories, lots of fun. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think there was a period, and I guess that everything I say, I think kind of, it's not like I'm going to make a disclaimer for this podcast, but they're totally my opinion. So it's like, I'm not, I guess I'm just giving opinion. I'm not like forthright, this is how it is, but just how I interpret the world.
Well, that's the nature of this entire podcast, which is basically hearing a number of different people's experiences of being in the arts industry in whatever form they're in, because everybody's experiences are different. But the hope is, over the course of, like, if you were to listen to a dozen, or even, I mean, now they're almost 300 episodes, but if you were to listen to, you're going to start hearing commonalities, things that either people struggle with or succeed with, or things like this. And it's finding those common threads through, the struggles and the successes that make the podcast what I think is most compelling and interesting, because most of the things I have learned from my conversations with guests has been the fact that I hear like similar things repeated over and over, no matter whether they're curators, collectors, artists, whatever their roles. I hear common things being talked about again and again. And that's the most interesting part.
No, of course. And I think, that's a really good point, because, maybe we were talking about this before we started recording, about the idea of the ecology of art. And it's divided, but we're all kind of, to a certain extent, like have these there's so many overlaps if you kind of like look within the wider ecology. And I think it's something which kind of, I think it's important to recognize, actually, and it's interesting.
Well, like in the old days, there used to be a divide between, like, we'll call it like fine artists that show in art galleries versus creative people that create things that are more utilitarian or more like design shops kind of thing. I'm using current terminology, but like, and there was a divide between those. But now some of the fine artists produce things to make a living and sell them in design shops, and some designers make elevated things that are also shown in fine art realms. And so like that, even that sort of separation is sort of going away in many ways. But on the other hand, we're an incredibly divided, like, haves and have-nots society.
And that, I guess, relates to kind of the point we were talking about in that gallery when you're first becoming an artist, and it's like, why is no one talking about what they do? And kind of, I guess, fast tracking that thought, so I remember it's like, no one talks about what they do. No one talks about, like, okay, how do you make money?
Which is my most important question.
Yeah. But kind of, obviously, I think, I feel we're going to have this like quite organic conversation where kind of we can go off on different tracks, and relating it to what you were just saying, like the idea of being in that situation, say 10 years ago, how are people making money in this space, to where we are now. And in terms of the conversation, I think I felt since I've, been an artist, the conversations are becoming more open. So I definitely sensed in the beginning, it was like, don't ask. I think kind of it was almost like, don't ask because it's 7 p.m. I'm gonna be out all night, and I don't want to kind of think about what actually I really do in my life. I'm going to be in this space, introduced as an artist, be an artist, and kind of perform like my character as an artist in this kind of like in this situation. And it is, you're introduced as, oh, come meet this fantastic artist, blah 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 blah. I mean, and that's kind of a really nice fantasy world, But I think kind of, I guess it's a consequence of just the general feel of basically, I guess, the zeitgeist. We need to be more open now. We need to be more transparency is a term, for example, which is used a lot for multiple kind of like aspects of society, to be transparent about like where things come from, to be transparent about like, okay, how things function. Yeah, and so I kind of see in a positive way that hopefully this is a direction where we are confronting these themes a little bit more honestly.
Well, I mean, it goes into all kinds of different aspects, though, because like for like grant writing, residencies, all these kinds of things, oftentimes they don't include salaries. They don't include, just like a general like daily stipend for an artist to be at a residency kind of thing. Like there's so many things where a lot of society and culture and funders and all these support, they are happy to do things like, and no, I'm not knocking this opportunity you have, but like they'll give you a space, but they won't give you any money to do anything in that space.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite an interesting point, and it relates to a conversation I had with a friend last night about how actually lucky you are in Norway to have that conversation. It's like, I've been given a studio for free for 2 years and I'm not getting any money to be here. It's like, that's messed up, you know.
I had a conversation with this lady from Finland.
Yeah.
Now, they support the arts even more so than they do here in Norway. But she was complaining that the government only gave her a studio and bought her art supplies.
Yeah.
That was her complaint. And I'm like, what else is there? Like, that's everything. If I had that, I would have no complaints.
Yeah. And in fact, I think it's interesting because, again, like kind of the conversation we had last night is like, but the cleaner only comes twice a week. This is terrible. It's like the free coffee's run out. It's like,
first world problems.
Totally. Totally first world problems. And this is where kind of I think just generally like art occupies this very interesting space in how it's so divisive as well in terms of like, you know, people's perceptions who are outside of, I guess, outside of art. Okay, so this is a sort of a stretch, but isn't art part of basically a democracy in a sense? I mean, if democracy exists, art should be kind of, I think, central to that. And that's a big jump. And I'm going to kind of like, because going back to kind of the first world problems we're discussing, you have like it's possible. So say for example, you know, you can be critical of the institutions of kind of like political structures. However, Norway and Scandinavia, you mentioned Finland, you know, they still operate as social democracies in a sense, and to an extent more so than I don't know. I feel the UK kind of having moved here, and they are still, despite kind of the issues with, okay, are the arts being funded enough? Comparatively, sort of Scandinavia and Norway are putting more money into the arts than a lot of countries. So say, for example, you know, you live in the Czech Republic but come from the States, and, you know, I meet a lot of people from the States who come to Norway, and it's like, wow, like literally, like I can't, public money, what's that? That does not exist in the States, for example.
Well, just to be clear, like we're here in your studio in the tower, and your studio is larger than my apartment in the Czech Republic.
Yeah, exactly.
And you got it for free.
Exactly, it's insane. But kind of going back to that, you know, I guess what I was thinking of, it's like comparatively, I guess, to other countries, Scandinavia or the Nordic countries fund art very, you know, generously. However, you know, when you're in the bubble of that country, still you can identify that, okay, it's still a battle, you know, so kind of arts institutions and art unions, they're still kind of like trying to kind of create a healthier environment, because obviously, you know, politically there's always people who want to maybe defund or kind of like reduce funding, and so it's a very interesting, I think, kind of balance where you have like a country which is so well funded, but you know, and this is the area which is hard to sympathize with, I guess, kind of if you're outside. It's like, because still things could be better. So kind of thinking in a very utopian way, it's a very utopian way, you know, in a way, what, you know, being in a society which really encourages art, nurtures art, and gives space for artists to kind of like make livings or exist. You know, even in Norway, we're still not completely there. And, you know, I mean, arguably that's not going to happen, like for, you know, it might not ever happen. However, you know, through my nebulous kind of conversations, I will kind of, as I said, return to the same theme about how do you exist as an artist, you know. So you talk about earning money. So in a sense, kind of being an artist is like, even in this kind of like society where you have working grants, you have project support, you have subsidized studios, which I can see you laughing going across the table, like about how ridiculously
those things they're not offered in most countries. So like the fact that you even have multiple grants.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to understand, I was for 10 years, I was in North Carolina. And in North Carolina, there's 2 grants more or less that anybody can apply for. There's a small grant for basically the equivalent of 500 euros. And then like a $25,000 one that like will pay for, theoretically 1 year of your art supplies and your studio, whatever kind of thing, and nothing in the middle.
Yeah.
And that's it. And that divide is one of my big pet peeves also, because just like, the middle class is going away, blah, 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 the rich is getting richer, all this kind of stuff, like same things in the arts basically is like there's funding, well, in America, so I can't say anything about here because I don't know the exact numbers of everything here, but like in America, like the younger artists, the cheaper artists, the whatever, they can get like a little bit of money just to sort of help them, or the more established artists can get actual funding to fund projects. But anybody that's not one of those two criteria, they're screwed. There's literally nothing for them. But I also want to go back to the thing where you're talking about like making money. So two-part question sort of on this aspect. A, do you sell your work? And I ask that because my impression in Europe, and I lump Scandinavia into Europe and the UK for that matter. I'm still American, so pre-Brexit education. But I lump it all together. So like in Europe, I feel like art is more about the concept, and so you have an idea, and then you propose it or pitch it or whatever, and then you get funded. And then there's no necessity for it to be sold because it's already been paid for in the production of it. Whereas in America, it's produce a piece of art, put it on the wall, sell it, take whatever money you get from that to reinvest to make more work. Totally different systems. I wish I had been in Europe much earlier because I like the European system better, my personal opinion. But is that sort of the way you see it, having now been, you were educated in the UK, you live in Norway, so like, do you feel like it's more in that line, or am I completely off base because I am often wrong?
No, I mean, I think I can answer that. Like, to my, I have an opinion on that. And so
I love it. Go ahead.
And also as well, actually, I think it was on a previous podcast, which I did listen to, and you discussed this kind of, I guess the comparison between publicly funded and privately funded art colleges, I guess. And I mean, of course, they're also mixed as well. They kind of exist together, but obviously in Europe, I think you're correct in saying it's weighted towards the public funding in terms of where the majority of artists acquire their money from. But going back to the idea of the concept, I mean, giving you like an example in my development, the first, so okay, I'm going to trail back as well. So so when I did my MA, when I got round to doing my MA, it was at Goldsmiths in London, and it was in photography and urban cultures. So it was based in the sociology department. So it was kind of more kind of, I guess, a critical kind of MA, kind of academic, but kind of attracted visual artists, sociologists, photographers. So it was a very kind of mixed bag of people. But while I was doing that MA, I got my first public funding. So I guess kind of like, giving in little kind of dropping in bits of my history. I was doing the MA part-time because I had to work. So working, doing my MA. And then also I kind of was like, but, this isn't enough. I need to kind of like, because I need to be doing projects, I want to. So essentially, in the UK, we have the Arts Council. So I'm not sure how much you know about the Arts Council. And I kind of applied for a project support. And it's very competitive. I guess funding still is competitive. Even though that's the thing, even though public funding is there, it's still competitive. So it's not a given that you apply for something and you get it. But going back to the idea about, okay, so is this funding hinged on concepts? I mean, when I applied, you give like I guess like your credit is in like your CV, or where you've studied and things like that. But I was in the infancy of my I guess my artistic career, but it's essentially a concept, So it was like, I'm going to do this. Can you give me money? And I think it does not. I mean, this isn't. I don't think it is totally like this, but there is a lot of. You have to explain what you're going to do, and kind of like you have to use. I guess it becomes about language, like can you write kind of in a language which basically kind of like gives the sense of legitimacy to a project. So it's like, okay, like I'm going to read this like 100-word description or this kind of, and then the kind of, which is, I guess, like you give a short description usually on kind of, okay, this is what I set out to do. And then you kind of give a bigger description. And the interesting thing is, it's how to make the project sound legitimate. And it's also, the funny thing is it also changes. So if you get the money, the project can change. However, you still have to, in a sense, have an essence of that project. So it's not like, when you make an application, you come up with a concept. It's like, okay, I'm doing a portrait project on people who live on the streets or whatever, and it's because I'm discussing kind of like, the economic crisis and how it's affected kind of blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to do this portrait project. And then, all of a sudden, then you can't say, oh, now I'm doing something completely different. You still have to hold on to kind of the essence of that project. However, it will inevitably change. But I guess my point is that you need kind of to sound legitimate and write in a way which kind of, I guess, is an acceptable and understandable kind of like form for, I guess, the jury or committees to kind of say, okay, we'll back that, we'll give that money.
Well, and that's my biggest pet peeve, like across the board with the entire artistic industry at this moment, which is like, I had a previous guest that like explained this beautifully, which is that artists these days, so a visual artist, let's just stay with what we do. So visual artists, we are expected to not only come up with beautiful visual arts, interesting, engaging, whatever, I use the term beautiful, but like compelling visual arts, and write eloquently about it. Whereas a writer who writes a book is not expected to paint a painting explaining their book. So why is it that the entire industry has gotten into this very reinforced process, so whether it's grants, funding, whatever, like all the different things basically that build a successful artistic career, feel like they're leaning heavily into us not only being able to make beautiful, compelling work, but also be able to write eloquently about it. When if we wanted to be writers, we would have been writers, but we chose to be visual artists. So that's not our strength. That's my pet. That's my soapbox for the day.
Yeah, I mean, and I get that.
But hold on, I also want to add in the other part that you brought up the competitiveness of the application process and stuff like this. The problem that I also have with those things, this is all just me like bitching.
Yeah, do it. Yeah.
But my problem with that is the criteria. Who decides? How do they decide? What's the most important element? Like I wish that when they did those competitions, they would say, first we will look at the work. Second, we will look at the statement. Third, we will look at the CV, let's say in a perfect world that's the way it would work, so that you would know to like really fucking kill it with the portfolio. And then, the second most important thing is this, and the third most important thing is this. So like you can literally like hierarchically know what to put the most time, effort, and energy into. But unfortunately right now they ask for like a million things and you don't know what's the most important part of it.
I think with the application process, I mean, I think kind of they do like, so say for example, if I apply for project support, like, there is a formula, a format to the application process. But I think in a way, I mean, I'm kind of sensing from what you're saying there, it's this unknown quantity. It's like,
it's the subjectivity that comes into it.
It's the subjectivity. But in a sense, I mean, what I've learned, and I mean, again, you wrestle with it, but accept at the same time, all systems are flawed. So you can have kind of like, I guess, returning to this, if we kind of like position Norway as like, at the kind of, in terms of public funding, artist unions is kind of quite an exceptional space in terms of artist representation. However, kind of talking about like the very kind of privileged problems we're discussing here, it's a flawed system as well. So again, it's like the idea of, you get this the subjective notion of what's quality work or what's deemed like, okay. I guess the two words you hear a lot is like quality and activity. So activity in terms of like, okay, so what have you been showing? You know, how regular are you showing? Where are you showing? Quality in the terms of like, I mean, that blows my mind, quality, because it's just like, okay, like that's who's got the, you know what I mean? It's like kind of the metric system. It's like, where's that weight kept? Do you know what I mean? Which basically is the measure of quality, because it's like, you know, which is kind of like, do you know what I mean when I say that? Yeah,
I do. There are two aspects to that. Like the quality thing, totally subjective. You know, like, I mean, there are many artists in the world that are incredibly well respected and or sell very well or whatever they, you know, measure of success that I think are absolute crap. So quality, I think, is but what was the other one?
Activity.
Yeah. That one also is a bit crazy because like, the last set of work I did, it took me 4 years to complete that set of work until I believed it was ready to exhibit. So for 4 years I had no exhibitions. But there's this weird expectation that like, so if I'm working, let's say, on a new body of work, I should also be actively exhibiting my previous bodies of works, even though that's not what I'm making now, but it's what I have available in my inventory. So I should be and it's this constant like hamster wheel of a cycle of like, be making new work, but be exhibiting the old work, and be known, and then get known for the old work, but now you have new work. And it's like, for fuck's sake, let us just like focus on making our stuff. Like, this is why I love galleries or representatives or anybody that can do all this bureaucratic bullshit for me, because I didn't come into the arts industry to do all that crap. Like, I came into the arts industry to create things. Like, I love creating stuff. I love problem solving. I love all the sort of characteristics that go into like the process of being creative, fixing problems, you know, working things out, teaching it, even like, you know, trying to figure out how people learn and how they can then figure out how to do it for themselves. All this kind of stuff. Like, this is my thing. This is my Uber. I hate paperwork. I hate applications. That's not why I got into if I wanted to be in that industry, I would have gone into like sales or marketing or any other industry pretty much other than the arts.
Okay, however, so like intervening here.
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm being such a negative Millie today.
No, the thing is, like, you know, this is it's a frank discussion. And also, you know, I think now we're hitting a space where we can be quite, you know, I think we're building this kind of like almost potentially a manifesto, but say for example, what you're saying there, and this is like, I guess what our conversation will essentially be is a minefield, because there you're talking about, okay, I want to be creative, I want to make artwork, but I don't want to do the what essentially is the dirty work. And again, like, I say it's a minefield because being an artist and the artist, I guess, my interpretation of the artistic ecology, it's full of contradictions. So, you know, I'm going to throw something at you here. Is we've talked about, you know, Norway. You know, I've seen you kind of across the table like smirk when I talk about like the privilege of the Norwegian kind of funding system. But you're imagining a scenario which is impossible, where you want to make work. You want to enjoy all the, I guess, kind of benefits of being creative and immersing yourself in that process. But the dirty work, and it returns to this question, is how do you make money? And the application processes and the hustle is the emails. It's the kind of like writing kind of long project descriptions. And the thing is, artists, you know, need to, in order to, I guess, even attempt to make something of a living. I'm talking about like whether it's 10%, 50%, or 100% of your income through art. You need to do that in order to become even like make it even a substantial part of your income. You know, so this is kind of the boring side, I guess, of being an artist. I mean, kind of, you know, when you're kind of, I guess when I was young and maybe naive, and you know, you've got this kind of, we talked about like the left bank or whatever, the Latin Quarter of Paris, or I don't know, like this you know, this beautiful kind of world of drug addicts kind of like making amazing work at like kind of all hours of the day, and kind of like, this,
the lifestyle.
The lifestyle. But it's interesting because to actually make a living from art, the most successful artists that I know, I guess through my friendship, so people I do know, who are doing okay, and I say okay, kind of exhibiting and getting funding, and this is in Norway and I guess outside of Norway as well. They're really professional, they're super focused, and it's an interesting balance because I think it's all hinged on your desire to continue and try and make a living, because it's like this idea of, okay, and again, this relates to definitely how you make money, and it's okay, I really want to be an artist, I don't want to do it, because what you find is artists, we don't want to do other jobs. I mean, I've worked in, I told you I've been a bellhop, I've worked in psychiatric hospitals, I've worked in a men's clothing store, I've kind of worked in schools, and ultimately great life experiences. However, you don't want to do that. You want to invest as much time as possible in your artistic practice. But obviously that comes with, okay, if you're investing time in your artistic practice, obviously it's a completely obvious thing to say, but you need to, you need to pay the bills, you need to pay your rent, you need to essentially you need to earn an income. And this is such a kind of a difficult subject for artists to deal with, because it's how do you do that?
Okay, but I'd like to retort on your point about the dirty work, the word the dirty work. That I don't believe it. I never had the idea that the business side of it, the writing, the taxes, all the other. I never really thought of that as the dirty work. I believe that I was sold a bad bill of goods in my youth. Basically, people didn't talk about those things.
Yes,
and so therefore I was unaware until probably I was almost 30 years old that this stuff was necessary. Had I known at an earlier time, even in my undergraduate degrees, if my professors had encouraged us more, I remember my professor saying oh, you need to write artist statements and an artist bio, and that's it. That's all they ever taught us how to write. And just side note, they did a shit job at that too. But they didn't know, they never had to apply for grants, and they never had to apply for residencies, or maybe they did, I don't know, but they never really taught us that was important, that we needed to know this. And this is my problem, is that basically I feel to a certain extent, because of the time of my education, and probably even partly the place of my educations, that I was not set up with the things to succeed in the way that I hope that our current students, through things like this podcast and hearing how important this kind of stuff is, might learn and understand and appreciate and be aware of at a much younger age.
There's too many things to talk about around what you've just talked about there. I mean, so okay, I'm going to maybe do certain unrelated points. I remember this is illustration. When I did my BA, for illustration, I remember it was brutal, but very honest. I remember, they said, it's quite a small course, what I did. And it was quite a reputable place to study illustration in the UK and in Europe, I think, at the time. And they go, okay, only 10% of you will ever work in illustration, and also I'm not giving you any of my contacts because you're essentially the direct competition when you finish in this institution. So it's okay. And that, so it's that was pretty brutal, but also very honest. But obviously going to the visual arts, again, I've been out of, I finished my MA in 2009. So again, things are moving and changing. However, when you, quite a common theme when you talk to people who've graduated kind of in that window of time, it's no one prepared me for making a living. So what you have these kind of havens for creativity and discussion and pushing your ideas or finding your kind of your voice and
critique and craftsmanship.
Exactly. But proportionally, I don't think enough is given over to, okay, how is this a viable career? And I think you have like courses or you have talks, and I think it could be getting better. I mean, again, this is not through personal experience, but I just feel, it relates to what we're talking about. Hopefully things are becoming more transparent now. But I mean, even, from my experience, there was it's like, you're not here to talk about that. You're here to, as you say, you're here to kind of push your creativity and kind of, you're not here to think about making money. And that's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. And I think it's quite damaging. Hopefully, I wouldn't want to place the assumption that this is happening on all institutions. But the thing is, it kind of is. But the reason being, okay, opinion here, not kind of like categorical truth. No one fucking knows how to make a sustainable living. As an artist, no one can guarantee a route to success or a route to sustainability, because it's again the recurring theme. It's a massively subjective, a massively flawed system. And what do you do? Where do you, when you're out of that institution, it's like, okay, like, the funding system or private kind of funding. And these are all such unknown quantities. But I think maybe this sort of, we keep on connecting to this issue as well. And I'm going to introduce another sweeping statement about the art world. It's a tremendously privileged space, which sounds ridiculous. And I think your laugh is completely justified there, because it's such an obvious thing to say. However, it returns round to the minefield, the contradictions of the art world. So in terms of how do you function as an artist, there's this mystery, I think, about like, okay, how the fuck can you be an artist? How can you survive as an artist? You don't talk about money. You don't, as far as I know, like you're not selling much. It's like, how can this be your chosen career? Do you know what I mean? How come? And the interesting thing is, you have people who struggle, in a very heart on sleeve. It's like, this is really difficult. I can't afford this. And it's, but I want to do it so much. And you have people where it's just effortless. It's breezy. You know what I mean? It's like, it's this, and that goes to the kind of like the sense of entitlement. It's like, I am an artist. I should be an artist. This is what I do. And it's like,
okay, but there are those people that it seems effortless. But again, this goes back to the people that you brought up before, which is they are the ones who will sit in the office and do the work. They will do the emails, the marketing, the branding, the whatever thing that needs to be done, the applications. And it seems effortless because they don't talk about all that work that they put in. They just say, yes, I received this grant. And so all you see is, just like in the arts itself, in the production of a piece of art, like you could have put a decade into, like, I'm looking at your work that's sitting here, so like decade into learning the weaving techniques, but all I see is this finished product. So I don't see all the hard work. And so like a lot of these people, like, so this work looks effortless at this point because you have all that work behind it. So like there are many people that do that kind of stuff, and they do it, and they are, kudos for them. I know today I've sounded kind of negative, but like,
it's good talking to me.
I'm just being critical. Like,
yeah.
I don't think I'm being negative about any of this. I don't hope anyways, but I do have something I would be negative about, which is that the going back to the education stuff. I teach at university now. So at university, a student takes an average of it's like 5 classes a semester, 2 semesters a year. So that's 10 a year. So that's 40, approximately 40 classes a year, or 40 classes in order to graduate from a bachelor's degree. Now, in that, every single school I've taught at, which is I think 6 schools, maybe 5, there has literally been one course called something to the effect of professional practices, making money, making a living as an artist, whatever. One course. That's it, out of 40 courses. That should be something that should not only be integrated into every course. So like, wouldn't it be great if, like, when you were in school, let's say you took a intro to graphic design course, that like just even like 1 week out of that course was, and this is a way to make money being a graphic designer, and then you take a photography course and they do 1 week of, and this is how to make money as a photographer, or a sculpture course, and this is a way to make money as a sculptor. Like, that should be integrated into all these courses instead of, and it should be talked about, all the time, because like, it's not, I know so many amazing students that I have taught, and I know so many amazing people that I went to school with who are phenomenal artists, but because they also did not have that skill of being able to balance that creativity with their professional practices, have not been as successful as they could or should be.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's but that's the.
I'm sticking up for the little man.
No, exactly. No, totally. I'm totally with you on that. But it's an interesting scenario though. It's like, it's that's the reality, and I think kind of in a way, like, that's life in general. You know what I mean? You can't like sit on talent. You can't. It's.
But then what good is talent?
No, but this again, we're going back to this utopian scenario. So in a sense, you're kind of more. You're more kind of like Norwegian than you think, because what's this society where I can just sit in my chair and be talented and just and have a house, you know what I mean, and have kind of like all the security that kind of like a job would give you just because I'm talented, and so it's kind of, it returns to that situation, and this is, I think, it's the kind of the contradictions that bubble in the artists, and it's like, you want this recognition, you want to be, but it's, you want to kind of just explore and be in this creative space, but you need to do more than that. So I guess kind of what I'm interested in is trying to identify, okay, so I understand that, okay, I've been an artist for 10 years, or I've just graduated, or I have trust in my ability. I know that I can do it. However, I need to find a way of doing it. So I guess the space I'm in, I feel secure in, like, as an artist, in the sense of, like, as an individual, not as an enterprise, but just I have an assurance. Okay, I can make art. Okay, that's fine.
I just love the fact that you referred to yourself as an enterprise.
No, but totally, yeah. I mean, look, this weaving thing there is Hasan as, which is AS is basically the kind of like the shortened version for kind of essentially like limited, is the equivalent of limited company. But yeah, so in a sense, when, and I think kind of when you graduate, it's also kind of a, I don't know why I'm focused on graduation, but there's this like, there's this question of, can I perform? It's like a performance issue. Do you know what I mean? It's like, can I do it? Do you know what I mean? And I think as soon as you kind of just relax, and it's just like, okay, I can do this, but it's like, how can I do this?
Well, a lot of that comes to like peers and other friends, contacts, all this kind of stuff too, because like, I know, I'm not going to talk about other people. From my own experiences, when you leave school, you leave a lot of the support network behind, oftentimes, because oftentimes you leave the physical, not just the campus, but you often leave the region or whatever. And the loss of that, and then trying to find that again, and keeping up that confidence without the active support, not only the support network, but the consistent feedback that you got in school and things like this. Like, I mean, when I was in school, they gave us statistics that said like 95% of you will stop making art within 5 years of graduation.
Yeah.
Like, and quite honestly, that's kind of true.
Yeah. Okay, this is really a trippy analogy, but I kind of, I see like one of these wildlife programs where you have these sea turtles on the beach and they kind of lay thousands of eggs. Okay, this is random, but you have like, it's this kind of, beautiful program narrated by David Attenborough or whatever, or he's this like, famous kind of...
just got knighted a second time.
Yeah,
yes.
My word. And so, thousands of eggs kind of like, sort of hatching on the beach, and literally ultimately there's only one or like a small like infinitesimally small percentage who actually make it actually as a kind of like into the sea, because you have the hurdle, you have the you have all the goals or whatever, kind of picking at kind of like the turtles as they run to the kind of the wash,
But so basically in the end, you're literally saying the art world is survival of the fittest.
It's totally survival of the fittest. No, totally. And then again, it's like, well, what tools do you need to survive? And again, it all becomes something which you can kind of, I guess kind of what I try and do is kind of reduce things to kind of to understand it. But the more doors you open, you kind of end up kind of like, you still don't fully understand something. But I think that's quite an interesting point you make, survival of the fittest. So what is the criteria to survive? And
it's also subjective.
It's subjective, and it relates again to kind of like we've talked about languages you use for funding, or kind of the how fashionable your work is, or the big one like is who do you know? So kind of in a sense it's being an artist, you have to kind of, you do it because foremostly you love it. However, kind of it's a flawed system. And you've just got to kind of, if you want to try and make a go of it, to have try and look at how it's structured, understand the kind of the okay, where money comes from. However, still that doesn't provide you with a template to be successful or to kind of like make a living. But at least you kind of, and I guess this returns to this people to talk about art in this way at institutions, because it's kind of to give a sense of, okay, what is the real picture when you do kind of like leave, say, the institution and you want to practice. So I mean, we're looking at public funding, in Norway, working grants, project support, or you're looking at private funding, which is like, okay, like, I mean, patrons wherever they are, or just kind of people who are wealthy enough to buy work. I mean, that opens up another rabbit hole of, okay, like the, I guess, kind of privileged and elitist nature of the art world as well.
No.
So again, another revelation.
That is shocking.
Yeah.
The art world is elitist?
Oh my word, you wouldn't believe it.
I wish somebody had told me.
Yeah.
No, but actually, I want to go back to, you said the thing about the fact that a lot of the arts world is about who you know. And I've actually come to the realization that it's not who you know, it's who knows you.
Yeah, I mean, you can flip it, and I think that's totally, that I think it's a combination that, I mean, I think everything we talk about, it's not one thing or the other, it's multiple things, and I think that's part of the recipe as well. It's kind of like who knows you, but. I mean, there is totally space for, there's space for having conviction in what you do and reaching out to people. And it doesn't go down well all the time. But I think about when I moved to Norway, for example. So, say for example, I knew nothing about Norway before I come here. I mean, I knew obviously the basics, but in terms of the real Norwegian society, I didn't know what society is like in Norway. So I had no connections, nothing. And so, but I had a kind of certain, with my practice, I think I was hitting a point where I was just confident in what I do, and I was, there's conversations I wanted to have with my practice. And so kind of, it's like, okay, what institutions are there in Norway who I feel like I could, literally just start a conversation with, because of mutual interests. So I think kind of, it can, that isn't, again, like a solution to everything, but it's a good place to start to kind of like identify organizations and individuals who, like yourself, it's like, I want to talk to people. And conversations are essentially a really important way to develop things, I think, in like, especially, the I guess the art world, because it's about locating mutual interests and seeing if there's possibilities. And it doesn't always equate to like exhibitions, but I think it's about talking and learning and finding out about what's going on. And again, we can talk about like the, I can talk super cynically just about like, the art world or my experiences from the art world, but equally kind of it's this, it's driven by people who are, sort of passionate and have multiple interests. And one of those people or one of those groups will have like overlapping interests. And it's like, okay, let's kind of have a relationship, let's talk about like what we can do in the future, or just how we can, just have conversations to keep kind of I guess the vigor in the discussion going, you know. Yeah.
Well, obviously I'm a lover of conversations. I run a freaking podcast.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I have had almost every great opportunity in my career happen because of a conversation, not because of a portfolio submission or a formal meeting or anything like this. Like almost every opportunity, good opportunity, I've had some bad opportunities too, but good opportunities have come from like just getting to know people. Because like, I mean, everything you're saying. So like as an artist, if you want a gallery to represent you, the gallerist as a person wants to like working with you. So that's about personal interactions, not professional quality necessarily. I mean, that has to be there, of course, but they also want to have to like you. When a gallerist ends up trying to sell your work or place it in an institution, they're going to want to talk to the artist. It's all, again, going back to conversation. So like the ability to have good conversations, not necessarily intellectual conversations, but to be an interesting person, an engaging person, to be fun to be around, to be all these kinds of, you know, things that are, you know, general positive human attributes are very important, especially in this industry. Because like my wife works as an accountant, not so important there, you know, but here in this industry, that's incredibly important.
Yeah, it is important. And I think kind of, if we, you know, kind of going back to the point of like, you find people and people find you, this different, you know, the flip side of the coin. I think when you're approaching it from okay, I need to connect with people, you totally, I think it's, you know, it's about building relationships and kind of, so I think you made the point about every good opportunity has been through not portfolio reviews, but through kind of building these kind of conversations and relationships. I think that's totally the case, because I mean, I think you can function, you know, you can submit and you can kind of be selected on the basis of like an image of what you do, or, you know, and, you know, maybe that becomes CV filler, you know what I mean? But the good things on your CV, you know, mostly will be a consequence of building a relationship. And actually, you know, and that relationship may have started with a random email, or just, you know, like picking up the phone, or just a conversation. But it's that kind of like slow burning relationship. And it doesn't mean that that's like, you know, that's one of several, or, you know, of relationships you have to build. They don't come very often.
Well, I mean, that's another thing that, again, like it comes up again and again, which is a lot of younger artists, and to a certain extent, a lot of people outside the arts world don't even understand, is that like being an artist, working in this industry is a marathon, like a lifetime marathon. This is not, there's not even like a decade just sprint, like your 30s to 40s you sprint kind of thing. Like, no. It is always a marathon. And that like, I mean, a lot of the opportunities that I've had have come from people that I met 10, 12, 15 years ago. And then suddenly I reconnect with them for whatever reason. And then they were like, oh yeah, hey, yeah, what about, you know, doing this? And I'm like, great, yeah, happy to do that. But like, it would not have happened had I not made that relationship with them a decade ago. So, I mean, it's not it sounds bad, but like when I was a kid, I was raised in Washington, D.C. So political glad handing, and you know, everybody was out for themselves and everybody was using other people and things like this. And in my youth, I thought that's how the world worked, because that's what I was raised around. And so I ended up being a bit of an arrogant shit that used people in my youth. And quite honestly, people used me, and I was fine with that because I thought that's the way the world went around. And then, of course, in my age and wisdom, I have learned that is horribly incorrect, and that I should never have done that because it hurt a lot of my professional relationships. So, you know, learning this even at the age that I am is I think still of the utmost importance, because I'm still running the marathon.
No, I mean, I think the marathon's a really interesting analogy. I mean, I don't know where I am. I mean, I think I'm maybe on the 10K right now. You know, like it's because a conversation I've had again, like recently, it's like, so, you know, you graduate, you decide, or you know, you become an artist, and now it's the 10-year thing or whatever. It's like kind of who makes it beyond 10 years, you know, because obviously, I mean, I've just had a daughter,
So that wasn't obvious, but go on.
Did I say obvious? Look at me. I look tired. Come on. But yeah. So when you have a family, for example, that's another hurdle in terms of like how much you can put into your practice, and again your ability to make a living off that. Because ultimately, kind of there's these different levels which we kind of, I guess, have referred to. It's like this balance between, okay, how much time can I spend on my practice, and that's proportional to, I guess, your ability to make a living from that practice. So kind of it is proportional. So say, for example, I can spend 75%, say for example, of time on my practice because I can afford to spend 75% of my time on my practice, and that's because either I make money through my art, or because the other 25% of my time is funding that activity, which is possibly completely unrelated to this. So it's all this kind of this balance. I kind of lost my point there slightly, but
it's okay. Actually, I wanted to add in a little thing too, like the nature of like the marathon things. There's this book that I read in college. One of my professors, I think, told us to read it, which is called "Finite and Infinite Games" by this author James Karsh.
Okay,
I'm probably mispronouncing his name, but finite and infinite, and it sort of like made me be like, oh no shit, because like it's basically the idea that your entire existence breaks down into two kinds of games. There are finite games and infinite games. So finite games are games that there's a set field of play, set players, a beginning and an end. That's it. So basically a job. So like you working in a menswear store. So beginning, middle, all the people you worked with, there you go. That's a finite game. Done, and it has a completion, a winner, a loser, or whatever. And then there are infinite games, and these are games that you play throughout your entire life, and you play them for the love of playing them. You continually play them, and so the examples they give are like love, relationships. These are infinite games. But in the same way, an art's career is an infinite game. Like, I don't know any artist that I've ever met or even heard of that quote unquote retired. Like, they will continue to work as long as their body and mind is capable of working. So like choosing to be in this industry is not just like a passion, a desire, a money grab thing. I mean, it's literally something that we will physically do as long as our bodies are allowing us and our minds are allowing us to do it. So like, I find it, incredibly inspiring to think of it like that. But it's also kind of sad.
Yeah, but that's the I think that's the conundrum though, in the kind of that's the messed up place, we have to navigate those two, and that's the interesting thing. We have to navigate these different spaces, and I mean it is, in a way, like this infinite space. I think you can also relate it to maybe I'm going to make up the concept of reward. You talk about the finite and the infinite. So I think actually what you were talking about was more, kind of poetic, but kind of, and I think, that's a very nice way of articulating this kind of the longevity of that kind of ultimately like being creative gives you. It's kind of an elixir. You don't want to, you keep going and you don't want to stop. But, it's also the idea of reward. So that finite space, what you're getting, these are my hours and this is what I will get as a consequence of these hours. And I think kind of also, but in terms of reward, so that's kind of like, you could call it a closed reward. It's the finite, as you talk about. It's like, okay, I do this, I get that. And to a certain extent, that applies to art, but, equating the infinite in the idea of reward, it's this open book. It's kind of a lottery ticket. Like it's like there's always the potential for something, and you can get lost in this kind of something will happen like phase, and the something will happen phase could be your whole life.
I can't tell you how many times like I will put together a body of work and I'll put up an exhibition. I'll be like, this is going to be the exhibition, is going to make my reputation, like this will be my career defining series, and nobody gives a fuck.
And this is the wonderful, mystical, fucked up kind of like mindset of like artists, because it's this allure, it's like this mystery which kind of feels good, because in a way, like in a world where like I say we talk about these finite kind of like aspects of like living. Like art gives you this, it's this open book, something could happen. It's like, as you say, I'm going to do this show and somebody's going to walk in and just go, wow, you've changed my life. Here's like $100,000 or whatever. And like, and it's this kind of, you could call it hope. Do you know what I mean? And which basically kind of fuels us and fuels artists.
Yeah, I actually wrote the note, hope in a prayer.
Yeah, exactly. Hope in a prayer as well. Even if you're a freaking atheist, you know what I mean? Your hands are clasped together before that kind of like opening or whatever. However, it's, it comes also back down to, okay, managing expectations. Because, and this is where kind of like the professionalization, the attempt to try and be a professional in this world, kind of like the things you have to kind of maybe think about. And it's like, because what I like is, so say for example, I'm currently self-employed. I've got other, so my situation is I run a discussion group that gives me a degree of money, like a monthly discussion group. With an organisation called Praxis, so that gives me some income. I like do occasional gallery sitting at Oslo Kunstforening, which actually is pretty much kind of like close till August. So that tells you how regular my my income with those guys are. But it's managing those expectations essentially. So it's okay. Who is going to walk through that door? There's not this like mystery person who's just kind of like going to come in and
No, there is.
No, but that's the hope. But the reality is, it's like, okay, like what I was interested in, and I don't have the answers to this. So Oslo is, it's a capital city, obviously, but it's also kind of a relatively small city in terms of international capitals and cities, but. Okay, so how many people are collecting art, in Oslo, for example? So, I mean, these are questions, I guess, like it's not really a deep dive, but if you want to sort of like really kind of try and create a picture of like, okay, what are the kind of the financial possibilities? It's like, okay, so we've discussed public funding, and then you talk about the private sector. Who's buying art? So in terms of kind of like, this hope of like being in that exhibition, doing that exhibition opening, and who's going to come in. So you might have people from institutions that will kind of like, or galleries that want to come and see your work. And then maybe you have that, a private buyer who might be connected to a gallery or just kind of a patron or supporter of the arts. And actually when you start to kind of like try and reduce that scene, there's very few people who are there to actually like, give the opportunities that perhaps will allow you to be this kind of like artist who's making money and making a living.
Right, but just to be clear, you're saying like, oh, within Oslo. That's within every city.
But of course.
Like, I mean, that no matter how big, because it's a proportional thing. So like, okay, fine. Let's say you're in New York. Well, for the amount of galleries, institutions, and artists in New York, there's still probably the same proportion of like private collectors.
No, totally. I mean, when I talk about Oslo, I guess, as you say, it can be applied universally. But kind of that point being, and I think it's kind of an interesting space to dwell on, is we talk about the finite and infinite in the sense of openness. But however, when you start to reduce the art world into kind of like, you demystify it, it's a completely super finite space. So kind of there's, in a sense, like there's no space. Okay, I'll come up with like a strong opinion here. I think there's no space to be this kind of misty-eyed kind of this kind of artistic dreamer that thinks something's just going to happen to you, because actually when you kind of like reduce it down, it's a super finite space, and at the same time it could be interpreted as quite a depressing thing, because obviously then that relates to kind of like the as we've discussed, kind of the political like nature of how these like ecosystems are hinged, but also you need to confront that, because if you are kind of a completely stubborn creative who just sees this as their calling, as you point to yourself kind of across the table, like you need to get to grips with that. If you can, I mean, I mean, it's a difference thriving in that system, but like you need to at least kind of like have this as much of a real picture as possible in order to even contemplate, okay, this is what I'm going to try and do, you know.
Well, there's a huge difference between the two things that you're talking about, because like when I'm talking about this idea of the marathon of producing art, I'm talking about the marathon of being an artist producing. What you're talking about is the finite game, which I agree with you. You're right. The finite game of the, I don't know what the right word would be, art industry, art market, art world, but like the relationships of galleries, institutions, things like this. That's absolutely finite, because a director at an institution who loves you is not going to necessarily be at that institution for your entire life. And the person who owns a gallery, that gallery may not exist, or they may not want to represent you. So those will end up being finite games for sure. So the industry, the capitalism, let's say, almost the sort of surrounds it, absolutely finite games. I'm the romantic here, talking about the infinite game of the production of art, the being creative, the in the studio, and that's probably to my detriment. So there.
No, I mean in a way, like it's nice that you kind of bring it back to that, because obviously that's an important aspect as well. However, I think, I don't know, the way I think is, maybe the analogy of caged birds is a little bit harsh, but I think it's more a question of like we kind of like we're tied. So even in the wonderfully creative space of your studio and your mind, everything kind of, I don't know, some people. Yeah, it depends how your mind, or how you organize your thoughts and your creativity.
But it is a gilded, privileged cage.
It's a gilded, privileged cage, but in a way, I mean, okay, like, I mean, this is something, maybe it's not privileged, like working for, guess what I've kind of generated in terms of like annual income in the past year. I could work in a supermarket maybe and kind of like earn more, so privileged to a point,
Okay, but yeah, I will like contradict that one. I understand. I know lots of people, and people give this to me all the time. They're all like, oh, well, why don't you just get a job? Like, just get any fucking job to have like a nice stable income, and then you can do your artist stuff on the weekends. And I'm like, fuck you all. I have based my entire education, my career, my life around this industry, or this practice that which I hate calling it a practice, by the way, because I feel a bit of mastery at this point in my career, but whatever. But my practice, that like, I hate the idea that people think that I should just get a fucking job. And I'm like, shut the fuck up. Like, you're not going to go work at McDonald's just because you're broke, because you have an education also. So like, the fact that because the word art is somehow involved in my name, they think that I should just settle for anything I can fucking get. Whereas if they have like a engineering degree, they're not going to work at 7-Eleven. Okay, but because it's art, like we should settle for anything we can get, and I'm just sort of like, fuck off.
Yeah, it's the scenario in your head is you don't understand how this works.
That is a mantra that runs through my head all the fucking of like, you don't get it.
Yeah, and this is an interesting bridge, because it's quite interesting the roles we're playing here, because I'm kind of like, sort of, I guess, through this conversation, sort of trying to kind of, in a way, like continually navigate this sort of what I can understand as finite, or at least certain kind of like pillars of reality within the system. But like, to be an artist, to be creative, in all these things. Okay, so I'm going to create a bridge which kind of goes almost meeting you halfway a little bit there. I mean, I think it's like, the problem is to be. To invest time into creativity, you need time and you need space. I mean, let's just put the money aside for one moment. I was going to say,
and money. That's my trifecta.
Yeah, it's big time. Yeah, but even if we just deal with time and space, because these are two obviously major parts of it, and to make, and you need that. You need to be able to immerse yourself in something. This takes, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. And and this is the wonderful thing about creativity, because we're capable of this, and we can do wonderful things as a consequence of that. So it is disheartening when kind of oh, you could do something else. Oh, you'd make such a good like such and such, or you'd be brilliant at doing this. It's like you don't quite understand what I want in life, But again, it's the internal conflict which kind of at this moment of time, like artists particularly kind of like deal with, because it's like there is something, and that's why in a way, like, we talk about, we've mentioned the divides in the kind of the artistic communities and in general ecology. However, what unifies us is we all have this kind of or most of us is this understanding, this investment that we have to put into it, and through that, a lot of mutual respect is kind of like thrown to people who believe in that and are pursuing that, and that's a really I think empowering thing. But obviously but then it relates to kind of also the idea of we're going through that, and as me and you, we can talk very sincerely about the hardships which kind of and it's true, we put a lot in, we work really hard, and that takes a tremendous amount of energy, work, creativity, and it's very personal. And ultimately, when you do something and you do it well and you situate it in a gallery space or a public space or whatever, it has a real impact on people as well. Not just inside the artistic community, but to people who can then look at that and say, you know what, you have had time to articulate something that I haven't had time to articulate. And I think that's a really, we haven't talked about the audience in that connection. And I think for me, this is a very affirming thing about making work. And so despite the ludicrous kind of like, I guess kind of environment that we are part of, there's something about it which kind of, when in that brief moment when you communicate something to somebody and it's like, I get that, or even like, I'm really glad I've seen that. And that's kind of a really nice moment, because in a society which is fast paced and is kind of, when most people are dealing in kind of these, I guess, like not dealing or expressing themselves creatively, you need artists within that society to kind of think outside the box. So in a sense, I think for me, that's what drives me is an artist, because you need that. And kind of again, it's one of those points, because I like the kind of the edge we've been treading in terms of like how seriously and how not seriously we take these things. And again, like I think I remember you shaking your head earlier on when we were talking about like democracies, for example, which again, like, are problematic. However, you need a society which enables free expression, because when everything kind of is so regimental within society, and there's and it's driven by kind of like just gain, financial gain. It's kind of like a highly, even though art is part of like the ultra capitalist kind of system, but we're shifting it to kind of like, okay, this space to think differently. You need a society where kind of these voices are able to kind of like have a platform, because it's really, and it doesn't just serve itself, it serves wider society, where people can kind of, as I said, kind of engage with ideas and see things which kind of everybody, whether you're an artist or not, I'm not sure, you would totally have an understanding of this, and it's like we're all complex, so it could be like, even though kind of, it could be a family member, for example, or somebody who's not an artist, but everybody kind of, I think, has this complexity which kind of art can draw out, of people, so if you present kind of a work which kind of, maybe we come from different camps, but there is usually a concept that comes behind my work. There is an idea there. But when kind of like those ideas connect with people, it's a really, I think, a really affirming thing, and it just helps kind of, I don't know, I just think we need that in society. We need, and that's why also when we discuss the art world, it's important that kind of all the kind of like the artist communities kind of keep a true sense of like, okay, creativity and diversity within those particular colleges, according to kind of, I guess, countries or internationally.
Well, just to be clear and to be like, I don't know, vulnerable about it, but like the the position I'm taking is wrong. Like everything that I have expressed about like my romantic ideas, how much I hate all this kind of all the work and the dirty work that you call it, all that kind of stuff. I'm wrong. Like I'm doing it wrong. And unfortunately, for too many years, I sort of fought to try to do it in that wrong way. When everybody kept pointing me like, oh, you need to write grants. Oh, you need to get this. Oh, you need to do that. And I kept fighting it, saying, no, I don't need to. No, I don't need to. And I want to make it really clear to the listeners, like, if you're cheering along on my side of this whole sort of argument, you're wrong also. Like, I mean, it's not the way the art world works. And that's why I created this podcast, so that I could hear how wrong I am about how I thought the world worked. And the reality of it is that like I had it wrong from the get-go. And so hearing the kinds of insights is always sort of like makes me a little humbled. I'm sort of like, fuck yeah, I gotta just step up and do that shit.
I mean, you know, again, like I can only talk in terms of contradictions. You're wrong, but you're not wrong at the same time. We're all wrong.
I'm optimistic in a romantic way, but it's not the truth of it. It's not the way it actually works now. And that's a big difference, because maybe it did in the past, and maybe I'm overly romanticizing, you know, the 1920s, you know, mama, like drug-fueled productions of Toulouse-Lautrec kind of thing. But like, it doesn't work like that anymore. And we have to, if we want to be practicing artists in the 21st century, we have to step up and play the games that are set in front of us. And my attempt, I shouldn't even talk for anybody else, but like my attempt to not play those games because I didn't think the games were like relevant or important or anything like that. And I you know, buck the system, be the rebellious youth and all that crap. It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work. No, it doesn't. So I think, you know, also kind of I'd like add something. If you want to be an artist, I think kind of I'd like to insert if you want to attempt to be an artist, because it's, it relates back to the idea there's no guarantee that you can even be that. But
at best, it's a lottery.
At best, it's a lottery. And you kind of like, yeah, you know, so when you do these applications, for example, I mean, maybe it's a lottery ticket where you've got a 50-50, you know, so say, for example, I mean, yeah, I mean, agree. You have to kind of like, play the, you know, I mean, it's a cliche, play the game. So, I mean, I think playing the game also, but it's still true. And it can be a fun game. It can be a tiresome game. It could be a game that actually, you know, we need to change. But there's always is a game in that sense. And I think, you know, going back to, you know, but you have to kind of do that. And there's no guarantees as well. I mean, I said like applications. I mean, if I do an application for a project, when I do that, I mean, I guess this is, you know, it could be advice to someone out there who wants to.
Which is a great way to end this. So
go
ahead.
Yeah. So it's like, if you've, you know, spent time with us over this podcast and you're thinking about writing an application, whether you're whoever you are, an experienced artist or somebody who hasn't, you're writing your first application, it's like, it's chiefly you do it because you want to do it. That has to be, for me, that's the kind of that's what drives you, because you're an artist. And this relates to kind of like the beautiful stuff we talk about, the creativity, the production, the kind of the pure kind of artist, kind of like you, essentially, without being silly about it, the belief that this is an important thing to do. So then it's like, okay, how do I describe that in a way which I guess is readable to the panel who will make a decision on that? And so in a sense, making it, doing that, you have to have an understanding of like, okay, you know, you'd have to maybe have an understanding of how to write an application. You might have to read other applications, because there is, as we say, a language game to be played. But ultimately, you know, when you do that, you can't be deluded about, like, and this is the whole thing, you can't be deluded about what's going to happen. It's like, okay, so I've done that, so I'm going to set that up as a 50-50. It's like, I believe in that, but also somebody else will completely maybe just not want to back it.
Well, going back to your wording, like setting your expectations.
Of course, but the thing is, I mean, for me, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm talking about a particular ratio there, but I think where I am, particularly in my kind of career, I do it because I have a belief in it. I do it because, and when I do these applications, I have an understanding of like maybe that system. So, and I do it because I think it's in with a shot, but also this is where we hit the wall. So as much as we can, try and gauge, okay, how does this system work? So try and understand, okay, what are the opportunities and where can I apply? Where can I try and understand the possibilities? But even when you have an understanding, which is always kind of a continuous thing to try and understand how things work, even when you hit that point, you get a refusal, and then all of a sudden, this kind of like wonderful idea that you have, you'll have to adapt. It will either crush it, or you have to kind of adapt it and push it in a different direction, or just kind of like get up and start again, or keep going. And this is kind of, I guess, like for me, I guess what characterizes how many artists continue. It's a sheer stubbornness, because it doesn't matter how much you understand. We're completely like navigating a world where we have very, very low levels of control. We're not the accountant. We're not somebody who knows what they're getting at the end of the day. Mostly, it's completely random. And so, yeah, I mean, it sounds it's quite depressing. It's quite depressing in some senses, but that's how it is, And but you have to keep going, because ultimately it's that kind of belief which drives you, or just that kind of like desire to kind of like express yourself and produce. Because maybe we haven't talked about that enough. The production aspect. It's the enjoyment of making.
And we'll cover that in another episode in the future. This has been great fun.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So totally hungover. It's really, really bad. And so.
Before you leave, we would like to thank you for listening all the way through the entire episode. We would appreciate it if you would share this podcast with your friends, family, co-workers, studio mates, anybody with an interest in the arts and creative endeavors. The building and strengthening of the arts and creative community, not only today, but for the future, is at the core of our mission for this podcast. They can listen and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. We are produced by 5014. The audio was edited by CushAudio Services, and the music was created by Pete Bybee. The Wise Fool Art Podcast is supported in part by an EEA grant from Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway in an effort to work together for a green, competitive, and inclusive Europe. We would also like to thank our partners Hunt Kastner in Prague, Czech Republic, and Kunstsentrene i Norge in Norway. Links to EEA grants and our partner organizations are available in the show notes or on our website, wisefoolpod.com.